Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and today we're welcoming back Tanner Yarro from Yarro Studios. Tanner has just recently surprised the industry with another innovation that is sure to change the way that people use dice for years to come. Tanner, welcome back to the binge. How you doing?
Good. Good to be back.
It's good to have you back, man. So for people that want to get kind of the backstory, because we've talked about some of your other innovations in this industry in episodes 37 and 51, check those out where we had Tanner on the podcast. You're kind of actually there near the beginning of this whole journey, even on my end, which is kind of cool. Episode 37 was only a few months into the podcast. So it's kind of cool now that we've crossed over 200 episodes to have you come back and talk about how you've grown as a company as well. Before we kind of get into this new product, this flip die, I was wondering if you can give our audience just a quick overview of Yarro Studios and kind of what you guys are all about.
Yeah, so Yarro Studios is my little think tank convention house, and I want to just keep making cool stuff in the RPG and board game space. All my ideas just come from things that I want, and I'm always surprised to find out that they don't exist, and then we do it. And that's kind of it.
Now, you're not a small company, obviously. I think you're in the millions of dollars now across your various campaigns. Everything from your map book, you're one of the first people to do that, to have to lay flat map books for D&D. Your Infinity roll, which just kind of rolls on forever, and you have this massive ongoing kind of revealing dungeon. One of the other things we talked about on the podcast was even in the toy industry, right? Like, so even beyond, kind of board games and in the gaming industry, you've got involved with toys, right? Like, I think last time we were talking, you had this utility patent on like this 3-dimensional kind of light bright type product or something like this.
Yeah, Glowbots.
The Glowbots.
Yeah, that's one that we'll hopefully see soon. There's obviously, I try to be quick with what works and what doesn't work, and not spend time on things that don't work, and let the audience kind of dictate. But our team is not big. It's still just 2 people that are full-time, me and my finance and my business manager kind of dude, Chandler. And then everybody else is contracted.
That's awesome.
And yeah.
It's one of the things that often I'll talk to colleagues or, people in the industry that are saying, when we talk about the videos, right? The big thing is videos with Kickstarter campaigns. And I always cite you as an example of how, yes, videos are nice and you have to have a video, but you don't necessarily have to spend a boatload of money on a video. And I think if you go back through your campaign, and this one too, I think has got more animation in it than you typically have, but still, a lot of this is, your camera, you talking to camera, you doing something kind of interesting, something kind of fun in front of the camera to kind of engage the audience and demonstrate the product, but you're not going like crazy with the 3D animation and all the kind of animated, like in this one, obviously, because you have all these renders of these coins, clearly you have some assets to use there, but it's still not the heart of the story of that video. The heart of the story of the video is actually you, right, around a table. Is this a philosophy you hope to kind of stick to in years to come, or because it's, clearly it's working, right? Like,
Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit. I was looking through your past videos, and the videos that get the most views were about saving money on Kickstarter. And I feel like that is probably my number one philosophy. I think that to an extent, the more that you spend, obviously, if you do it right, the better it is in the long run. But I would say about 90% of my video fees and cost was the 3D animations.
Yeah.
And I think that they turned out absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
And I think that they helped a lot. That first animation of the coin spinning and opening up cost about $1,000,
Wow.
and that was the one that I put on TikTok, and it hit 1.5 million views on TikTok, pure organic.
Oh, that's
And
fantastic.
so
Wow.
when that one started going viral, I created a landing page and collected emails, and that one TikTok video got us 6,000 emails and phone numbers to start this campaign off. And that cost me, $1,000 for the video. But if you look at my TikTok, the other 90% of my videos, which are another million views, were me with my prototype that cost, $600.
Yeah. That's crazy.
So and then everything else in my video, I laugh, and every time I show somebody the video, there's a scene where I'm talking about how I've made this my career and I love it, and I'm working on the computer, and I'm actually holding my iPhone with my other hand. And I actually upgraded to the 3 camera one, because it gives you, this is the best purchase for creators. I
Yeah, yeah.
literally shot my entire Kickstarter video on an iPhone
Is it like a
for nothing.
13 or 14? It's probably the 13, I guess. Yeah.
This is the 13,
Yeah.
and I don't have a case. I just dropped it and cracked the back.
But it goes to show that there's tools that most people have already that can allow them to create content as long as you're getting creative on how you approach it, right? Like, I mean, I'd be remiss to say, and I'm going to put this in Canadian dollars because it always sounds bigger and it's the only way I can see it. But I mean, you've hit like almost $1.5 million Canadian dollars on this campaign, right? And you're just starting, right? You still have 22 days to go. If someone's that's
Yeah,
doing like,
we did it in under a week. So this morning at 8 a.m. was the 7-day period, and we hit it yesterday
yeah,
around 4 o'clock. So
yeah, it's crazy. But for like that kind of level of funding, when I look at other campaigns out there that are in that kind of vein, they're spending like 10 grand on a video, right? To introduce their,
yeah,
their campaign. And the point I was trying to make is that you don't have to spend gobs and gobs of money on your Kickstarter campaign. And quite frankly, I think if you had to choose between spending your money on, a slick video or putting that money into actually growing your audience, your ads and your audience is probably the better spend in that regard, I would say, right?
yeah, no, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think I was just thinking about this. Somebody found an old Reddit AMA that I did after my first Kickstarter.
Yeah.
I just was loving like the vibe of feeling like I was the guy. And he reached out to just ask some follow-up questions on what I've learned over the past couple of years, and I was able to think more about it lately. And he asked me, is it better to put your money into ad spend or the Kickstarter campaign
Mm-hmm.
video and the page? And the more I thought about it, the more I just thought, it really is all about your product. So
Mm.
it's neither of those things. And it product first, and then there's tons of philosophy we can get into, but if your product fits the Kickstarter ecosystem, and there's some rules that I have created for myself, then you focus then on marketing and building your audience, and last I would say is your campaign, but they're all important.
So what are one of the rules that you've created for yourself, or what are a couple of them?
So my first rule when I'm like meeting people that want to do Kickstarters are just no toys for kids.
Mm.
And that just comes from experience. It sounds very like a really strange rule, but there's a
Yeah.
ton of people that have this idea for this kids product.
Yeah.
And mothers and grandmothers, people that are buying toys for children, aren't on Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is you spend, way too much on the education part of marketing, where you're teaching people, first time Kickstarter users,
Yeah.
mothers. I'm just speaking from numbers and
Sure.
demographics here.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's an interesting one because it's there's a lot of people that want to sell kids toys on Kickstarter, and I've tried it. It doesn't work.
Kids toys, kids games.
And
Yeah.
and then I would take it a step further and go like, obviously it's easier to say what is the fit, and the fit is products that are made for young men between the ages of 18 and 35.
Mm.
And they are nerd, geek, trend culture. And so it's everyday carry, consumer electronics, board games, role-playing games. If you fit there, you can make money on Kickstarter. Otherwise, I think it's just a complete uphill battle.
Yeah. In which case,
So I have people, yeah,
there's
I had like a dentist come to me with like a tooth extraction tool, and he wanted to kickstart it. I'm like, look, this is just not the market. You're not selling it to the people that would buy it.
It's a good point, because I think you're right. And it doesn't mean that the kids' games or kids' toys aren't viable products. It's just there's other avenues to get those to market or to, to reach your target or the people who are actually going to buy it without, burning a lot of cash in an ecosystem where that's maybe not going to do as well, right?
Yeah, and I see a lot of people think that Kickstarter is just a way that they can maybe even just pay for tooling. Like, hey, if I make 50 grand, I'll pay for tooling. And it's like, Kickstarter works like Amazon. You can't just list something and watch it explode.
Yeah.
To make 50 grand on a product that doesn't fit the ecosystem, you're going to spend 50 grand. So,
yeah.
And I've done that. I've done that 3 times. So I'm not just speaking out of my butt. I'm speaking from solid experience that if it doesn't fit, it's not worth your time.
That's awesome. I want to ask you about this flip die. I mean, this is probably one of the coolest things I've seen in quite some time in this gaming industry, and it truly is an innovation. Can you explain to people kind of what is flip die and where did this idea come from? Like, how did this kind of? I mean, it seems so obvious now when you see it, but this didn't exist.
Yeah.
2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So, how did you come up with this idea? What was the inspiration?
Yeah, so my first 3 campaigns that really did well were Dungeons and Dragons accessories, they're battle maps. And one thing that I kept seeing was dungeon masters were buying them. And that was it. I mean, people were buying it for their dungeon master, but it was a tool for dungeon masters.
Mm.
And then I always had in the back of my head that, most D&D parties are between 4 and 8 players. And I'm literally building products that only sell to 1 in that group. And so I always wanted a product that could sell to everybody at the table. So that was in the back of my head. And then when COVID hit and everybody moved online, I had this like come to Jesus moment where I was like, I can't build a business that depends on somebody else's IP. Meaning, I don't want a product that is dependent on the success or failure of Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, Dungeons and Dragons. And luckily we're in a renaissance for Dungeons and Dragons, but I don't want to build a company that's dependent on somebody else's IP. And so you could argue that the dice fit that as well, but I could also argue that dice have been around for longer than D&D. You can use the flip die in any games. We play Monopoly with my 2d6 flip die Lord of the Rings version of Monopoly. And so it kind of spanned that gap of like, it was still an accessory, so it still appealed to my audiences that I built, and it wasn't dependent on just built for a dungeon master. And it is for D&D, but it doesn't have to be just for D&D. And we get people on the Kickstarter page every day that are like, I don't play D&D, but I'll use these in Warhammer. I'll use these just to flip with my pocket. And the world record dice buyer just needed to have them. So and then when I was thinking through those 2 things in the back of my head, I saw dice projects doing really well on Kickstarter. There was the Wizard dice was kind of the first one that set the ball rolling, and it was just unique molds for the dice. And then Wormwood and Dispel did a really big one with hard edge dice. And I just sat there and thought, how do I randomly generate numbers in a different way? And there's some ideas that I have in my head that are literally the most convoluted, worst way of generating random numbers 1 through 20, and some that I think are pretty cool, and we'll see them after the dice coin potentially.
So this coin essentially has like a little ball bearing on the inside that when you flip this coin, the ball bearing kind of moves around, and then when the die or the coin lands, the ball bearing will basically settle in one of the holes and reveal itself that has a number associated with it. Essentially, is how you get your random numbers, I guess, when you flip it, right?
Yeah, like a roulette wheel, and then there's a lot of math that went into the numbers and the angles and slopes inside to make sure that it's fully random. And then I would say another bit of advice for Kickstarters to have this success. This didn't happen overnight, and I give full credit to Iran, who you know from Green Inbox.
Mm-hmm.
But he joined the project pretty early, and we started showing the coin to our community, and we would be hit with all these questions and concerns like, this looks dumb, the numbers are too small, I can barely see the ball. And where before I would get in there and argue with these people like, no, trust me, I have one, it works.
Yeah.
Iran was like, look, let's just take all this feedback and keep tweaking the product until they don't ask more questions. And so we spent maybe 100 hours over the course of a month asking people to rip it apart. But then anytime they did, I would get online with the factory and fix those issues. And what you see is a freaking $1 million 1 week campaign. And if you read through the comments, there's no more questions. Everybody's just excited. And I've never run a campaign like that, because before I learned this, I would just launch it and argue with people in the comments and try to convince them otherwise. But how much easier it's been taking that feedback and, with a board game, hey, this rule doesn't make sense, this sucks, or I don't like the art, then you fix it.
Yeah.
Because it's if you launch with it bad, it's bad forever. But if you fix it, then it's good, whatever time and money that takes. So,
well, one could say that's
advice.
what Kickstarter is supposed to do, right? I mean, that's the purpose, is not to say, here's a finished game that I'm going to start shipping next week. It was to get people's feedback and people feel like they're part of the journey and they can give input, and, hopefully you can then tweak, that final product that is delivered to the backers maybe a year later or so forth.
True. But I would add that's not a way to make money on Kickstarter. That's a good way to launch a product on Kickstarter. But
Sure.
If you spend the time to do that dev before, then you can make money on Kickstarter and get those final tweaks and still have them be a part of the process.
Yeah.
I mean, we get a lot of comments on the Kickstarter now where people are like, hey, this is awesome that you hit 1 million, but this sucks that you hit 1 million, because now we're going to have scope creep. And I'll just say it, like, I was 100% expecting to hit 1 million, maybe not in a week, but I've had manufacturing lined up to do 500,000 coins for the past 3 months. And so nothing has surprised us. But you can't just say that, right? People see and they're like, oh, you hit your $15,000 goal, but did way more. And I'm like, if we did $15,000, I would be completely disappointed in myself.
Yeah.
Even though that's the goal that I set on Kickstarter. But our internal goal is 2 million. And we have everything to get to that point. And if we were trying to solve the problems during the Kickstarter, you don't get anywhere near there.
Yeah, that's fair. How did you figure out the inside mechanics? You're saying that, you call a factory, right? And talk to the factory, say, hey, make this change, make that change. But that initial design, how did you collaborate with somebody? Did you get engineers to help you? Or how did you get to that initial internal design that worked out the randomness of this ball to make sure that, it wasn't just going to stick in one spot with the centrifugal force as you kind of flipped it? Like, how did you work that out?
Yeah, so we did the first round of samples. We paid for them to be die cast with a soft mold. So you have hard molds and soft molds are probably 3D printed, and they're good for 1 or 2 casts, and then they just don't work anymore. But the difference is $100 for a soft mold to make 2 coins versus $5,000 per mold in stainless steel to make hundreds of thousands of coins. And so we made a soft mold for the D6 was the first one that we made, in a D12. And we got those samples. We flipped them, 1,000 times. I had them for 6 months, took them to shows. We met with a few mathematicians. I put it on Reddit. Again, I shared it with the community, and I was like, I don't know how to do these numbers. I'm not a mathematician. How would you do this? And I had a doctorate in mathematics from Harvard who has requested to remain anonymous, work with me, that I met through Reddit on structuring the numbers so that every three grouping is the same standard deviation.
Mm.
And then how those numbers work on the top and bottom, we drew a lot from roulette wheels and dart boards that have a very strategic placing of the numbers to get randomness. And then we did 4 rounds of soft molds, and we even did some like he ran some statistical analysis using a mild like game engine to like use our 3D models in test flip, until we landed on, we flipped our D20 1,000 times, we flipped the other coins thousands of times, but tracked the D20, and our graph is on the page. And
Yeah, it's just showing it. It's cool.
Yeah, we were able to get and that was another thing that was super important for people. It was making sure that it was random, and rather than arguing with them, we had to get to that point and prove it not only to them but to ourselves, and do lots of iterations until everybody was satisfied.
How do you, are these like soldered together? Like you're like literally hammering it, like you're smacking it with a hammer on your page. So clearly it's durable, but how do you keep it together? Like how is this coin kind of fused?
Yeah, it's called brazed, and the zinc alloy, they put in another material and hit it with electricity that any it's the same way they do jewelry. So anywhere where the two halves are contacting or are close to contacting, it fuses.
Like a solder almost.
And so there's not, I know in the image we have, I'll just show this if I can, if it will focus. I have a piece of paper here. Let's see. Is that
Yep.
focusing?
Yeah, I can see it.
So there's these little nubs here that are just for the samples and to line it up, but the final one is flat, so that the areas of contact are 100% where the two coins touch, and then it fuses, so it literally becomes one piece of metal, which is why we could hit it with a hammer and it doesn't.
Yeah.
I mean, you smash the coin before you separate the two halves.
That's amazing. Could there be a plastic version of this? Like, would a plastic version ever work or no?
We looked at that. The issue is in the interior, because the current interior is machine tooled.
Yeah.
And that gives us like microns of
precision.
Like, yeah, precision versus plastic. And if you get, some, it could. I haven't looked at doing it. I wanted metal because they're metal coins, but I think you could, the way I've seen some sharp edge resin dice that are really good. But yeah, maybe version 2, a lot of people were suggesting, a clear coin to make it even easier to see where the ball goes. And I think that could be really cool.
Well, I was even thinking like licensing, right? So, I mean, this is a super cool idea, right? And I can see in an industry of indie developers, board game developers, who have games coming down the pipe, maybe there's a licensing deal you can do with like a lower cost version that they can actually integrate, flip die, TM into their game, right? And whatever the design is matches the theme of their game or so forth. But I mean, it could be a way to kind of make flip die almost become ubiquitous, right?
No, it would be really cool. I mean, obviously, the dream would be to like do Lord of the Rings flip die as like a Yarro Studios product.
Yeah.
There's a 7-die set with Lord of the Rings on it, or official Dungeons and Dragons. But then there's totally the other side of like, hey, the new version of Gloomhaven has 2 flip die in it that are Gloomhaven flip die.
Yeah.
Or yeah, 100%. And we have the patent, a utility patent on the coins, and so we definitely could look at that.
Well, that's awesome. One thing I've seen, like when different people commenting online, is around AI art and the emergence of using artificial intelligence, like with Midjourney and some of these other software programs to create art. Is this something I think you've been dabbling in as well? AI art?
Yeah, totally. At first, I totally got sucked in and generated like 10,000 images in the first couple of days that it was available.
Yeah.
And went through all the processes of, hey, let's fill the Kickstarter with art from this. And then it slowly started to come out that, and totally understandable, that this was not a good thing, right? It was using art from other creators as its database. So it was taking, you know, artists and their art database, and then it was creating images from there. And it kind of created this divide of like pissing off a lot of artists, rightfully so. It's using their art without their permission, but it was kind of this up in the air, kind of like gray area. Is it okay? And so I decided to just push away from that, because I love our artists. We work with a lot of artists, and I didn't want to come out and be like, look, I hit $1 million and I didn't pay any artists, I used AI. Now that said, I used it today, and I use it regularly to kind of create concept art for my artists.
Yeah.
So I'll give the real use case. Our wooden chest that we're selling as an add-on, we're designing that. And there's a lock on the front of the chest that I want. And I wanted it to look like carved jade. Like we have a lot of that imagery on our Kickstarter page. So I wanted this carved jade padlock. Couldn't find anything on Google Images. And then I was like, oh, duh. And in 2 seconds, I had a carved jade padlock to show my artist, to be like, let's design something like this.
It's so is it like the green box you get on your page? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
So that was an artist that we hired, but I liked the feeling of it.
Yeah.
And I just barely sent it to you on Facebook Messenger. I don't know if you can pull it up, but this took me 10 seconds to generate, and it's a photo from Midjourney of a carved stone jade lock that now my artist can work from to potentially do something with the chest. So for conceptualizing quickly, it's awesome.
Yeah, so it's basically that guy right there.
It looks like a photograph, and it generated it in
seconds.
30 seconds. And I was trying to Google image to be like, look, make something like this.
Yep.
But couldn't find anything because I don't carve jade padlocks. It just didn't come up with anything that I thought was cool. But I was able to knock this out in like 30 seconds.
I guess it's the difference of using something as a tool versus kind of the end product, right? And that's kind of where the ethical, I guess, dilemma is. I mean, I use it myself when I used like one of the earlier ones, Wombo, which isn't super fantastic, but our game we're working on right now, Cities of Venus, I need to have a conceptual image of a floating city with very specifically with pink clouds around it, floating in the air with, kind of like a night sky above it. And going through different iterations, I was able to find an image that was pretty close approximation to what I was looking for. Then I hired an artist and said, I want you to do your style, but this gives you an idea of what I'm looking for. And then they went and they did their own version of that. So I can see it as definitely a tool for people prototyping for sure. If you need stand-in artwork for your game as you're kind of, it's always better to have something that looks visually nice when you're playtesting and so forth, and kind of working out the kinks and something like that. It's just kind of, I guess, that next step where people make the decision to say, no, my finished product is going to use the AI art. And again, I'm kind of torn on this one because I look at this industry and, there's massive campaigns like you've had, and congratulations. Now you have, there's a war chest you can dip into, right, for future innovation you're working on and so forth.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people that are doing this as a hobby, and, they're doing it at nighttime or on weekends, and they have a regular 9-to-5 job. They don't have the resources to go necessarily hire an artist to create, 20, 30 pieces of art. In those cases, those campaigns, may or may not fund well, but at least it gives them something that they can start with and they can afford, right? So on that perspective, I look at it and say, I think it's a good thing where it's allowing more budding game developers to get into the industry, where maybe the last barrier to entry for them was the ability to afford kind of some of this upfront artwork and things like that.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there. I think that it's a again, it's even a gray area on that. I think that smaller campaigns
Hmm.
and smaller creators can 100% use it
Yeah.
and use it well. Like I'll send you another image. I got really good with it and I was generating some like Unreal. I was generating some pirates and I was like, you could just literally drop these into a pirate campaign.
It is insane. Like
Oh,
the
I'll have
stuff
to
I've
find it
seen
later.
through Mid Journey, and we can always tag it on the if people would join our board game binge Facebook group. We'll obviously put the playback of the video there if people are listening. Maybe we'll link in some of the images in there. But the photorealism is insane. Like I've seen some pictures where it literally looks like a photograph of an actual person, and it's AI
It's even
generated.
getting better too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so check this out. Let me drop
Would
this
you
one
say
into
which is
here.
your favorite one? I think Mid Journey for me is probably the one that seems to be kind of ahead of its time. Oh yeah, that's cool. Kind
So
of
with zero retouching, if you were making a pirate card game,
yeah, you could totally use
there's your
that.
pirate captain. Drop
Yeah,
that in. What I was getting at was if you're a small creator, this is an amazing tool, totally. And I would even put this art on the finished product. But obviously, if your campaign then gets to a point where you can afford to bring in an artist and a graphic designer, you should. Now, if
yeah,
Wizards of the Coast released a Dungeons and Dragons book or module and the art inside was Midjourney, you know that they would get absolutely crucified,
yeah,
right? And so I think that it's just like I think everybody knows the I think there's this mutual understanding and respect. Like I'll show you another image. This is currently the so all the flip dice come with a mouse pad,
yeah.
kind of neoprene mat to protect your tables, and it's totally just included. And I know we expected it to blow up. I didn't have cash to on hand to pay for an artist to design the neoprene mat, but the mat is actually currently Midjourney art.
Interesting.
And I'll throw that to
I
you.
think
But
I have that on the
obviously, we've
actual
hit a point.
page too, right?
Oh yeah, it's on there too.
Yeah, so I'm going to show off for people watching
Yeah,
on the replay, and I'll try to use some descriptive words to describe it. So he's basically got this illustrated map of this, I guess, this world. What's the name you're giving this world?
I don't know yet. Like
There was something like
the
seven
the
realms or
seven
something like that I was
realms.
reading.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And which is cool. And then a part of that was a 5e. It was one of the stretch goals too, right? Like you're going to throw in a free. Uh,
Yeah, we're gonna write it.
yeah,
It's gonna be awesome. That's a maybe for another discussion for another time. But we're basically building out National Treasure, the plot of National Treasure as a Dungeons and Dragons adventure. So I searched everywhere, and there's no good heist campaigns. And so this is a full heist campaign where you're working against a very wealthy benefactor who's trying
amazing.
to unite the seven pieces of fate, and you're trying to do the same. Anyways, this map that we created was created in Midjourney, and it's really cool. But now that we have cash, I'll get an artist to do it so it's an actual piece of
Yeah,
coherent art on the map. But it would have totally worked if we didn't have the success that we did.
and I think that's fair. I think people, and for those who wonder, like just Google Mid Journey if you don't know what we're talking about. Obviously, people I think know what we're talking about with AI art, but if you're looking for an AI art program, Midjourney is a good one. I think they do it through the Discord server, and I think you get like a free. Is it 10 images you get free or 20, and then after that it's a subscription model, but it's like $15 a month. Like it is nothing, right? When you compare it to actually having to go
Yeah,
and
yeah.
commission art, right?
I mean, I have a folder of 50 plus, no, sorry, 500 plus D&D items that I made that look you would never like you can get so good with Midjourney that you can't tell that it's Midjourney.
And
Like
is that
me
just a
just
number of
looking
prompts,
somewhere,
or how do you do that? Like, is it number of prompts or?
I yeah, it's just and that's the other side of the ethical discussion where is it just a tool? Because when Photoshop came out, there were people that edited photography by hand who were worried about it, taking their job. and it became a tool that people can use. And so being good at knowing how to manipulate Midjourney, some of these images took me, you know, hundreds of back and forth with the bot until I trained it to spit out what I needed it to spit out. And so I'll link you some of these, but you basically give it a prompt. It gives you 4 images, and then you can train the prompt to say, that's close, that's not close, do
Yeah.
this one, do that. But you look at these there, I wanted it to be in the D&D art style, which is watercolor,
Yeah.
and do Dungeons and Dragons magic items, and they look, you would never tell that was what I just sent you was Midjourney. It's like this green slime cloak.
And then how do you get consistent, cohesiveness in the art, right? So if someone is going to say take Midjourney and they want to do the art for their game using that as a way to save some funds and get some pretty killer art in their game, one of the challenges is when you start cobbling together different pieces, that it doesn't necessarily look cohesive, right? It looks like it's kind of like when you use Shutterstock or stock photography or images, taking that path, which is what I've done in the past. Your prototypes, they don't look super cohesive because you're pulling in different styles of images created by different people to try to, to create your finished product. With Midjourney, are you able to train this bot to crank out a consistent kind of look and feel to each image coming as those images change? Or do you have to keep kind of reiterating until you get another image that's in the kind of the same vein?
Yeah, and that's where you get into the ethical dilemma, because you 100% can, but the way that you do it is by telling it to create art like Frank Miller, for example. So if you add by Frank Miller at the end of your Midjourney prompt, all the art that it kicks out is going to be the same exact art style and feel very cohesive. I mean, if you look at the 4 images that I just sent you, you couldn't have a different smattering of Dungeons and Dragons items, yet they all look like they were done by the same artist because I used the same finishing prompts. So one is a healing potion axe was kind of the prompt that I typed in, and then I used in the D&D art style watercolor sketch. And when I put that at the end of every single one in the D&D art style watercolor sketch, and sometimes attaching even an artist to it, you can get super cohesive. I mean, you could drop these into a game right now and nobody would think twice.
Yeah. And then when you think of the ethical piece of that, okay, so in your example, in the style of like Frank Miller, but you could do the same thing with an artist, right? If you hire like an up and coming artist and you say, look, I'm looking to create a thematic kind of noir type thematic game in the style kind of like Frank. Can you kind of do me a style kind of along those lines? That artist using that as inspiration and as a kind of a template as well, right? So it's kind of a fine line, isn't it?
You're making the same exact argument that the Midjourney devs make on their podcast or their office hours that they do. I would tune in every Wednesday, and there was always this ethical discussion, because how the bot works is they'll feed it 8,000 images by Frank Miller. And then they say the thing that they say is that it works just like your eyes work. The technology is fantastic. But I think that's a get out of jail free card, because the argument that they're making is the same one that you made. You could hire an artist to say, look at all these Frank Miller and then recreate it. And they're getting a computer to look at all of these and recreate it. The issue is that with a human's eyes, that's just how they work, right? You take in the world around you and you create something new. But the computer is taking this art that Frank Miller didn't give them permission to use, but does he need to if human beings can do the same with their eyes? And so it's the argument that they make, and it really is just fascinating. And people that try to rip apart these AI tools, they say, oh, well, the Copyright Office has already deemed it uncopyrightable. And you'll see that over and over again, but it's not true. There was one guy that tried to copyright a piece of art that his AI tool created, but his AI tool had zero user interface to get to that point, and that was the reason why they denied him the copyright. But when you get into Midjourney, there's 500 different tools, text-based tools, where you're messing with aspect ratio and you're weighting the prompts differently, and there's 500 different things that you can type to get a prompt. I mean, some people's prompts to generate art are 5 to 10 paragraphs long.
Oh, wow.
And you could argue that is their art style, and then they're iterating with the computer 500 times to get to this final piece and product. And now that blows the whole, this is uncopyrightable out of the water, because there's tons of user interface. I mean, you can sync 500 hours, and at that point, is it any different than creating something in Illustrator? There's lots of tools in Illustrator that make the artist job easier. So it's just a fascinating.
Yeah, you can almost do an entire episode just on AI. My gosh.
Did you see Facebook release their video AI? Did you see that?
No, I didn't.
Oh, this is the coolest one yet, and I'm waiting anxiously for the wait list. But they type in unicorns running on a beach, and it generates a video of unicorns running on a beach, and a couple walking down a cyberpunk street while it's raining, holding hands, and it generates a video of that. And it looks,
come on,
you look close, and it's very uncanny. No, you need to look it up. If I share my screen, would it show it?
It won't. But what we're gonna do is let's save that for the next episode, because I get excited, but that's like another hour. What is next for you? Like, so for Yarro Studios, you have something coming after Flip Dice. Of course, you got something coming after Flip Dice. Can you talk about it, or what's kind of next for you?
Yeah, totally. One of the fun ones that I was messing around with after Flip Die was I found it at a yard sale. It's like a Sorry popper.
Okay, yeah.
That rolls the dice inside.
Yeah.
And while I was working on Flip Die, I found it's a kid's tic-tac-toe game that had 3 rows of poppers. And on your turn, you pop one, and it's red or blue with the X or the O. And I made a TikTok that I was like, I found this at a yard sale. Let's put D&D dice in it. And I went to bed, and I woke up, and it was at 3 million views. And so we're working with the factory on how to make that an actual product, because there was a lot of comments on accessibility, but it's essentially a 7 die set in a popper. And so that's one that we'll probably see. And then obviously I want to make more Flip Die sets. I really want to do a licensed one.
Yeah.
So we're going to start talking to Netflix and HBO and Amazon and see if we can get one of their cool licenses and say, look at the success of this campaign. Can we do a
House of
Brandon
Dragon
Sanderson set of Flip Die? Yeah, something.
House of Dragon. Makes sense. Well, Tanner, oh my gosh, man, I get excited every time I see these projects you're working on. And I can't wait to see where you land. I'm sure you're going to hit 2 million easily on this campaign. I wish you all the best. I'm going to put a link in the show notes for people who want to check it out. If they go on Kickstarter and just type in Flip Die, you will find it there. And man, we'll get you back for episode, the 4th round of episode. How's that sound?
Yeah, I'm down. Yeah, if we want to just talk AI, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I can check how many images I've generated with the bot in 2 seconds. Let's see. You go like this, and you go /
thousands,
info,
I'm sure.
And it is, so far I've generated 4,525 images, and I have spent 50 hours on the bot.
Holy
Not
smokes.
bad.
So for people listening, if you want to get to this kind of quality of imagery, there's some time investment, but the good news is it's not necessarily a financial investment too heavily to try Midjourney. So maybe I'll put a link to Midjourney in the show notes as well if people want to check that out. Anyway, we'll get you back for the next episode. Tanner, all the best, and congrats on this campaign, man.
Pleasure.
Take care.
Yeah,
bud.
of course.
Cheers. This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply subscribe to our YouTube channel, Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.